Testing, testing. Today is Monday, March 20th, 2023, and we are at the Green Ladle in Lewiston. We'll call the meeting to order at 5:40 p.m. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. We'll now continue with school committee and city council member introductions, and we'll start with the counselor from Ward 2.
To press this one. Okay. Good evening, Bob McCarthy, Ward 2 City Councilor.
Linda Scott, Ward 1 City Councilor, City Council President, and City Council Rep on the school committee.
Paul Beauplant, Ward 7 Committeeman.
Megan Hurd, Ward 6 School Committee.
Ashley Medina, Ward 5 School Committee.
Tanya Whitlow, Ward 4 School Committee.
Elizabeth Eames, Ward 3 School Committee.
Janet Bowden, Ward 2 School Committee.
Bruce Damon, Ward 1 School Committee.
Megan Parks, at-large school committee.
Jake Lang, the Superintendent.
Karen Paquette, Assistant Superintendent.
Stephanie Jelinas, Ward 7 City Councilor.
Lee Clement, Ward 6 City Council.
Larry Pease, Ward 5 City Council.
Rick LaChapelle, Ward 4 City Council.
Carl Shaleen, Mayor of Lewiston.
Scott Harriman, Ward 3 City Councilor.
Thank you. Now we'll turn it over to Superintendent Langlis to continue with the budget workshop.
Good evening, everyone. We are going to do some obviously budget review. I want to start with a kickoff with our binders. Also, before the start of the meeting, shared a number of handouts that we'll be able to put up on the screen so people also have access. And these will be shared obviously publicly. Certainly, we're facing a pretty challenging year, I think, on all levels. Subsidy for us is down. I'll say that a number of times tonight. The contractual increases and insurances are up, and it's a pretty straightforward math this year. Not too complicated, but very challenging. I would invite anyone to ask questions at any point in time. We're going to cover, again, what's in the binder, talk about the memo, some numbers, but really looking to get input and gather your feedback on some different things. If there's anything you're looking for more detail on, or you just have a question about, please throw it out. If we can answer it, we will. If we can't, we'll go find you the answer. We'll bring it back or share it out to you prior to our next meeting. I think my hope tonight is to have an idea from the committee and from the council what questions there are, but also where you see this going, what direction you see this going into, so that we can continue to do our work. We'll go from there. So starting with the binders, I know you have papers kind of laid out, so don't feel like you have to follow me everywhere. There is a table of contents in the front. And if you go by the tabs, it's listed in the table of contents. So the item matches the tab. Just want to make sure you didn't think it was page numbers. And you'll see at the front, the binder that was made for you, we made as the original version. Last year, we made a corrected version, and I felt it led to some confusion with people saying, well, that's not the number I heard about. So where is that number? And so this year we gave you the original binder. And what we're sharing with you tonight is updated language should the school committee adopt things that we've already discussed. But I want to be clear and upfront that they have not adopted it. And there is ongoing conversation about other areas, things that people don't want to part with, things that people think there might be savings in other spots if we do some things differently. So there's still a lot of ongoing conversation and questions and things that have come up from the school committee. So if I speak in any kind of definite terms, it's just the way I'm shooting language. I'm not saying that this process is done by any stretch, because it's not. If you go to the handout that we have, it's called Fiscal Year 24 Budget Update, March 20, 2023. So it's kind of the longer memo. Early in your binder, you have a memo. Some of this language will be the same. Some of it is not. What the goal was with this memo, and I'm just going to do an overview of it. The goal of this memo was to try to give you some context for where we are and some things that we've already done. I'm going to just give me a second to share my screen so that someone watching can also see it. And you can see this memo is quite extensive. If you would like to read it at some point, ask questions as follow-up, please do so. But I want to start with the highlights, and I think many people know, but I want to say it again for public consumption. Again, some challenges that we have. You're here tonight as a joint workshop. We come together again on April 11th, I believe. I'm looking at City Administrator Heather Hunter. She's confirming that. And then May 2nd, I believe, is there a potential for a vote on some things. On the 4th, following a city council approval, if that passes, we do a town hall just to provide information to the community if they have questions or want to come. And right now the referendum is scheduled for May 9th. And the phase of budget we're in right now is what we call the superintendent's phase. So again, until the committee approves or adopts things and has more discussion on items, this is still subject to some great change. As an overall summary, I'm sliding down into the next page here. There's a list 1 through 7, and I want to share those. Very mindful of the concern around taxes in our community. And number 1 is state funding is down this year for Lewiston. There's a few factors around that. Again, we're going to talk about overviews, some cost drivers. We shared with you a 1-pager. It's a summary of articles. And so that's an area of our school budget. They're called articles and have specific areas that's directed by state accounting code and the Department of Education. Our initial amounts have been reduced. I'll touch on it more, but we are up to now, at least in proposed reductions, $3.9 million. So we're almost at $4 million, which when we started this process, we were in the hole, for lack of better terms, $7.8 million. So we've reduced that by about half. We talked about processes and adding back and trying to be mindful that because we're looking at being really responsible fiscally, sometimes there's things we're all really passionate about that we really want. And so what we're trying to do by process is if we're adding something back into the budget or an add-on, we have to find something else to consider removing to try to keep that moving in the right direction. We've continued to work off of some things that have come up as themes in our mission and vision work. That's numbers 1 through 6 on the document. And that's just not by rank, but they're all important: to improve instruction systematically, improve our special education structure, to improve programming. That was a big commitment we made last year. We continue with that work. Grow pathways to graduation, maintain equity, social, emotional, and coping skills development efforts, school safety, stability, and communication. So those are some big components that we try to focus on and anchor ourselves when we have our conversations. Sliding down a bit, again, I'm just hitting on highlights. We still have a little bit of our ESSER money left. ESSER is that COVID relief, that last package of COVID relief. That's what we call that. That will continue for, I think it's around 37 personnel and some other maintenance and mechanical improvement projects for 1 more year. We can continue to use funds for the mechanical projects as long as they're underway before that comes to a close. So that's work we continue to do. Also want to make note that the state raised the minimum salary for teachers. I support educators. I think they're underpaid, so I'm okay with that. State didn't really fund it. And so last year it had implications in our negotiation process. And there's also rumor of what could be a potential bump down the road, even after referendums around budget. So that could be a challenge for us this year. If we go to a little further down, you see 1 and 2, and then there's additional costs that are up significantly. Just want to itemize this. So it's on the screen for those of you at home. This is just a bulleted list, but projected health insurance increases are up. about 1.4 million. Overall salary increases 3.1 million. Overall salary and benefit increases at 4.8 million. We still have remaining debt service for our high school expansion. There's still remaining compliance costs from the Department of Justice and some others. We still remain committed to improving special education structures for our students, but I also want to note that while there's some special ed costs in there that we may talk about, we've also reduced another significant batch of staff. Many of those positions are vacant, not all, but part of the work that we've done, that we've spent some money on audits and on some staffing to do, is to really look at our structure and system and say, how can we run more lean, but still provide improved services? And so you'll see some of the things that we'll share, significant reductions in special education staff, but again, through the good work of trying to vet out what we must have versus what we could live without. Overall inflation and the cost of goods, we're all seeing it. Whether you're trying to buy eggs or oil or gas to heat schools or supplies, whether it's shipping or the cost of goods, everything is incredibly expensive right now. We also have the challenge of returning classroom materials and supplies that we put in ESER to preserve budget and some dollars locally over the last couple of years. Because that money is sunsetting, it has to go back in at some point, or we won't have those supplies and materials for classrooms. We continue to explore ways to shrink the cost around those through ordering and some different efficiencies. And another big one, I think that's a lot of people are passionate about here in Lewiston, are after-school programs and summer programs. We have now for multiple years not included all of those pieces in our local budget because we're able to, again, push them off into funds that are sunsetting. There's a lot of requests that those come back into the budget. We'll continue to look for other ways to fund those, but at this time, we don't have another mechanism to fund that. If you turn the page over, there's a couple other items there to note. Enrollment is down a little, not as much as I had thought originally, because students continue to come in and sign up. Problem is they're using October 1 counts, and sometimes that can be a challenge for us when we add students throughout the year. Also, working with our tech and student information services folks, we identified 23 students that the Department of Education has on their rolls as seniors and either aged out or did not finish. And we have them in school every day. And so we're trying to work with the state on re-identifying those students in that data discrepancy. 23 students doesn't sound like a lot, but when you figure between $7,000 and $10,000 in subsidy per head, it adds up in a hurry. So we're trying to get every piece of that we can. That conversation's ongoing, they're aware, and we're trying to get that added back. Jump into the budget summary, but before I dive too deep into just some of the overview numbers, I counted this morning when I was making sure my memo was where I had hoped it would be. There's 65 positions that we've identified to reduce. That's a lot. That's a lot of positions that are in these reductions. Some of them hurt a lot. Some of them hurt more than others. And what we heard loud and clear from administration, and what we're hearing loud and clear, I know school committee members are getting emails from people about programs and positions and the work that people are doing. What we're hearing loud and clear is a strong voice around, we have to preserve what we have. The second part of that strong voice, and I'm sure you can appreciate how cumbersome this is, for people saying that the positions that are in East are 37 of them, people are strongly advocating now that those have to be funded at some point in time. I don't know how to do all of that in a one-year swing, but that's the conversation people are having. People are not feeling like there's a lot of excess out there that they can just trim. The items that we think that are vacant, that are excess, we cut a number of them last year, and this is more from the refined work that we did this year. Remember?
Thank you. Is this 65 positions current, like physical people, or are some of these unfilled positions that we're choosing to cut?
So overall, sometimes the fill and not filled moves because of resignations or hires, but I had figured about 20 of these positions to have someone in them, and the other 45 are vacant. that I think we can live without because they've been vacant for multiple years. And I think that was part of the challenge that the school committee and the city council put before us last year, was to say, if you've got something vacant for multiple years, you know, you feel like you really need it, but could you live without it? And so we've tried to identify those. So the initial number that we had been talking about was over 105 million. And the number on the memo you have before you today is 101. And that is a 3% increase in the budget from last year. If we think about inflation and salary scales and insurance costs, very few, if any, of those items are going to land under 3%. Staffing makes up 70% of this budget. People who live and work in our community, people who take care of our kids every day, this is their salary, this is their healthcare insurance, 70% of our budget. So when we start to reduce and go deeper, we're talking about people in our community and their professional careers and the work they do for our kids. So we're at that place now where it's actually would say we're beyond it. And again, school committee members receive these emails, as do I. We're beyond that conversation of, well, what about the music program? We're looking at some reductions there and trying to figure out a way to do that. What about administration? We have a reduction there and we're trying to figure out ways to figure that out. A lot of special ed staff, classroom enrollments. So when I talked about our overall enrollment being down a little, we're looking at classroom sizes. So how many kids are in 5th grade by school and then by whole district? So how many 6th grade teachers do you need? And nothing more. The danger in that is if we have any kind of influx, we don't have a mechanism in our budget at this point in time in this proposal to secure another teacher to have kids in a classroom without the classroom size growing. We've also looked at classroom size as a whole and trying to stay within constraints of both policy and law at the state level. But there's some challenges. So if you reduce by too much and you have any kind of influx, teachers will tell you, students will tell you, I would tell you, when class sizes get too big, it is markedly more difficult to manage. I know member Popelant is a lifelong educator who can speak to that. And there's other members here that have also been involved in education and different childcare work. So if you get too big, it's too big. We're trying to avoid those numbers. If you look down here at the numbers, this chart breaks down essentially what we gave you in the revenue sheet. So instead of diving too deep into these numbers, I'll just kind of go over them quickly and then take a closer look at the revenue sheet that has a little more detail and probably easier to follow this chart. A couple of highlights. The local minimum is a 6.73 overall ask. The debt service, that's a good thing. That's down a little. That's just projects getting paid off. Additional local tax, you can see here we're at 2.7. I didn't dare go too deep with percentages until I knew more about what our valuation was and all the numbers, and Heather's gotten to me that, but it's not reflected here yet. Again, scrolling down, I'm going to cover this in better detail on the revenue sheet. The state contribution, it says it's down 982,000. It's really 1.3 million. And in other pockets, I would argue because of constraints of funding, it's really more like 1.5, 6, or 7. But I want to address the notes that are there. So the first note is $430,000 to CTE. So Auburn is building a new school. And then within that school, there'll be additional programming like we do here at LRTC. But as a region, that serves 6 area schools. So when LRTC expands, even if it's in Auburn, the subsidy comes to Lewiston because that's that funding mechanism. So it's a nice number and it will serve kids in a greater capacity in our general region, but it makes our total revenue look bigger than it is. We can't use any of those dollars to move kids, to feed them, to buy teachers for them or compensate teachers for their work. So that money is only for CTE. So when I say it's down 982, it's actually 982 plus 430 that we're short in our subsidy in comparison to last year. I also want to note that there's been a series of funds issued late. So after the referendum Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to make it clear. I want to make sure that the city council knows what CTE is. Anyone not know what that is?
So just could be public too. So it's career and technical education. So these are our everything from our hard trades like building trades, welding, automotive, all the way up through medical programs, early childhood development, and business courses, things like that. Which we'll be sharing soon. They did very well last weekend in competitions or late last week at the state level. So going back to the 1.489 that you see there as a note. This is something that Heather and I have definitely talked about. The state has gotten into this cycle. I don't know if it's unique, but it just feels sequential to me. After referendum and taxes are set and all of that is done, the state decides some schools or some districts are going to get a little more funding. And then the rules by which how that funding can be spent, there are guidelines in state language. And in each of the last couple of few years, those funds have landed with the city, and Heather's been using it to try to do things like help with LCIP and related costs around that. So the catch to that, when I think that we are 1.3 up to $1.7 million short, the way that funding mechanism works, from my perspective as a superintendent, I would love to have those funds available in the general fund in ED 279, which is the subsidy language that the state uses. So if it was in there, it wouldn't have to be this later in the summer conversation. You would know that number exists beforehand. It could impact the tax base and what the ask is beforehand. And right now that money is coming in after the fact. The problem is we don't know if it'll happen again. And so you can't depend on it. And so that's that ongoing conversation. What does happen typically is we follow the warrant articles that go to the referendum. And the item we're looking closely at is item number 13 in the warrant articles, to try to learn more about if our budget is that lean, what's the mechanism for the schools to have those dollars with a school committee approval or process to use those funds if needed. I worry as we run lean, we may need a mechanism to do that. We could see a spike in costs or a roof collapse or whatnot. And schools are not, at least Lewiston Public Schools is not yet set up with a reserve fund or things like that. So there's no real mechanism for those really bad times. In the past few years, we've had so many unfilled positions that it's become borderline irrelevant. But when you cut 65 positions, that this year was creating fund balance because we didn't pay that compensation, we didn't pay that health insurance. When you take those out, you're taking out fund balance for future use. And I worry about that going multiple years. And when you don't have the money to start the budget using fund balance, you have an instant shortfall. So if we had no fund balance like this year, instead of saying we're short 7.8, we would actually be at 12.8, $13 million. Because this year we're using 5 million in fund balance, at least proposed. Another factor to consider, economically disadvantaged, they put a ratio on their funding formula. And last year it was 0.2. So in our community with a lot of economically disadvantaged students, that was additional funding for Lewiston. They reduced that to 0.15, which is where it was prior to the pandemic. So it's kind of a bump to help during the pandemic, and now it's gone back down. The state didn't give us a heads up on this. We found out when the funding came out, and we went line by line trying to figure out what was different, why are we down? And we found 4 or 5 things. And it's a little confusing to follow, but frustrating from my chair anyway. That funding was reduced in a city like Lewiston when the level of need that we have is great. And we have, again, contractual increases, cost of living, everything's going up. Next item down there, you see the unexpended funds. That's that 5 million I'm referring to. That's money already in the bank. When we had the audit review meeting with you at City Chambers, we talked about the unexpended dollars. Some of that number is encumbered or can only be spent in certain ways, like old grants that are designed for weights in the gym, things like that. So they're spoken for in certain ways. They just haven't spent those dollars yet. And then there's other funds, like I said, the unfilled positions that's unencumbered, unidentified is for what it has to be used for fund balance. And then we get into the totals. Big note to this, obviously, is when we talk about property taxes. And so locally, and Heather may correct me now or in the future, I tried to use the information the best as I could. But we have an increase in this level of proposal at $1.64 in the overall mill rate. Further down, there's more information about education subsidy. If you want to read up on it or look at the forms, I say ED 279 a lot because that's what they call their subsidy form. It's publicly available, something you can go look at. I have a little section there about the fund balance carryover, but I just touched on it with the if you use this much this year, you got to have it next year. If you use it next year, you got to have it a third year. The year that you don't have it is an instant shortfall. And so we want to be smart about how we tier that out. Let's see, trying to hit other highlights. Transportation, we budgeted for the full complement, and we're hopeful that that will happen next year. Transportation has been a serious struggle this year, but it's gotten better, but we're still canceling rides on an almost daily basis, beyond our control to an extent. We continue to work with state and federal folks about language around what it takes to drive a bus, the process it takes. And there's legislation currently at the state level anyway to push back on some of the requirements that which might help fast track some people who are certainly capable of driving buses safely, but don't want to take 6, 8, 10, 12 weeks to do so. I shared some reduction factoring. So using the evaluation numbers, if we need to find $1, if you will, in our budget, we'd have to reduce by 2.2 million. And just as a reminder, 70% of our budget is people. And at this point in time, it is people. It's not vacancies that we're talking about. I'm putting up on the screen. This is a list of reductions. It's for I think for purposes of I guess ease of mind for some people, but it causes tension in other spots. It's not intended. But until these items are agreed upon by the school committee, goes through the council for potential approval, and then obviously a referendum at some point. Until we reach that point of conclusion, we know exactly the funding, exactly what's been approved. It's hard to communicate to some that this position might be yours and not communicate to others because we don't know with certainty that that will be the case. So this is a list of items. Some of them are more clear than others because there's limited people doing it. But I'm very sensitive about this list and how much angst it causes our staff to see what will be on the list. And could that be me or a colleague I care about or a service I know kids need? So here you can see, excuse me, quite a list. And this ranges everything from, again, regular instruction, special ed, student staff support, administration, facilities, maintenance, tech, and some other additions. And if you look at it, at the very bottom, it gives you a total there of potential staffing reductions over 3 million, total other potential reductions, 872,000, and the total of 3.9. Little note at the bottom, I like to say repeatedly, we do think, whether it's through attrition, retirements, vacancies, what have you, that anyone that's in a position, we're pretty confident that we'll likely be able to find work for them. It depends on how much further we reduce. I think we're standing on the line right now of if we reduce further, we won't have work for people that get reduced. So that's the overarching, it's the memo for you, just to try to walk you through some of where we're at. Excuse me. The next item I'd like to look at, I can just go to it, is the revenue sheet. So that's the one with the bright yellow column. And so in the world of budgeting, most of you probably know this, but we have the revenue, which is just the money coming in, and that in our budget process, we match with our detail the money going out. And that's just the expenditures. And so what you're seeing right now is the revenue sheet, and this is about the funds coming in, but again, it matches our expenditures. And that's part of the work that we do in the budgeting process. These are greater detail from that table I just went through on the other form. And there's some things to note in here. You can see the negatives on the right-hand side in red on your sheet. The big one I look at is that total state. And that number that's down 982,000. And mind you, that includes the plus 430 for the technical programming. Again, I don't want to make that out to be an evil thing. That's a good thing for our region, but it's included in that total subsidy piece. If you look at just the EPS model alone, it's the very top item, that's where you see that 1.3 million I keep referencing. Any questions on the revenue sheet itself? And again, we can always circle back. Yeah.
In the middle.
Right there. Okay, thank you. Looking at under minimum local, additional local, there seems to be a huge jump. I don't know what that line is, but a 61% jump. If I could just get clarification on what that is. Thank you.
Yes, so it's a comparison from last year to this year. And part of the EPS formula, the language that I got as a superintendent calling the state to say, I would like an explanation for this, was that Lewiston's valuation has gone up about 6.6%. And so the state feels, and I've made this argument that our community is not a typical community, but the state feels because of that valuation increase, that the city of Lewiston can afford more for schools. And that's what drives that number. Yeah. All right, so if you have other questions about this at any point in time, please let me know. I can put it back up. I'm going to jump to the slides, but I'm going to ask you to look at another document while we look at the slides. The one with the printed slides that are grayed out is what I'm reviewing on the screen. So you could be looking at that. But the other one is the summary by article. So in your binders, that's under tab 6. It's the old one, and I gave you a new one. It's a one-pager tonight. And the new one reflects the, again, potential reductions at the superintendent level. So everyone see, it looks like this, just that one pager. Again, the old one is in your binder already. The new one we just handed to you tonight. So on the article summary, again, this is kind of state language, but for accounting purposes, Article 1 is regular instruction. So anything regular ed, staff, supplies, there's tech sprinkled in there, there's everything that we use for regular education, short of things that land in other places, goes in regular education. And you can see how the other items break out. Article 2 is special education. So again, anything special education lands there. Article 3, it says LRTC, that's that CTE Career and Technical Center we talk about with the hard trades and the medical programs and business. So one example I give you, and I'm saying this because I can see Mark in my line of sight, technology, for example, they're going to have something in a lot of these different articles because they use technology in regular ed. They use it in special ed. They use it in CTE, etc. So just so you know that The reason we're choosing to use article summary, just to give you a snapshot of numbers, and there's detail further back in your binder that you can also look through, is it summarizes an area that seems to be, in my mind, the most sensible if you know what the article is. But if we want to extract things like, well, how much do we spend on technology? That's a whole separate look in. There's another spot in your tabs that does things by general area. So if you want to look at, well, how much was staff? How much was some other things? There's another spot in these tabs that shows you that. So when you look at these sheets that present as these landscape looks, that's what those are. All the same things with a different view or presentation to them. What I have in the slides, as we look at, again, that one pager, I just want to give you the highlights in each article of what's changed. And again, feel free to ask any questions you may have. But in Article 1, and I'm going to say this a lot, and school committee, I'm sorry, you've heard me say it 100 times already. In each of these articles, you're going to see contractual increases and insurance costs. It's just people getting their steps. Insurance rates are going up. We don't have our insurance rates yet for the year, so we've projected and planned with a 12% increase. I've never seen it higher than 14, but the last few years it was 0, 0, and then under 1%. So this year we're going to see a jump because people have gone back to their screening doctor's appointments. They've gone back out to play and broken their arm and fallen down. All of those things start to factor into what our insurance costs will be next year. We should have that number by the end of the month, maybe even in a week or so. Once we have that number, we can correct the budget with the adjustment, hoping and praying that that budget number, the number that comes from insurance, is below the 12%. If it's not, we have an instant increase in our budget. Other things you're seeing here, 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 seeing here. Sliding to Article 2. There are some salary increases, and I put stipend, which is not great language. But in our contract, because we have a hard time attracting and retaining special educators and our multilingual educators, we've negotiated that they get an additional $3,000 annually as part of the work that they do. So that's in the CBA. It's been the budget writing agreements, and it's been approved in motion. So we move things in the budget. So if you're looking at detail, you see the jump. It's because we put this additional cost that's by way of the contract in the salary lines, so it's natural. Benefits increases. We've done some reorganization of positions to support programming and again other staff reductions, and again with the whole of serving more students in-house instead of spending big bucks on transportations and having them attend our choice schools. Cost us money up front, but then we're able to bill for it and provide services we can't at home, which is a better exchange for student and family. This is getting running and we're moving in the right direction, but it's going to take time. Again, these are supplies going back, and there's been a significant increase in special purpose private school tuition. So we get noticed. We don't get a vote, we don't get to chime in, we just get a raise. And compared to when you need oil in your house, if you use oil, you don't get to, you might be able to shop around, but you don't get to pay. That's a great 100%. What we've done though in this, and actually this is a bit of news to the school committee also, through input, one of the things, again, I did in my version, that our additional reductions you see today are to say, wow, we need this much money, an additional $1 million to fund students who are outplaced. There are not enough spots in outplacements that actually have to do with the bill. It's a little bit of a gamble, but what we've done in the budget we have proposed today is reduce that significantly under the thinking that we're not going to be able to spend it. It underserves kids, but the reality is there's no way for them. So we don't need to have the additional part of that. I guess we're saying we're never going to spend one. So we don't think. unless the labor market shifts drastically, which I don't anticipate this fiscal year, there's not enough sponsorships. So in this budget presentation, we have reduced the additional learning by 400,000, I think. And that's on the 500,000. Then we went back and forth on it. So we reduced the new estimate $1 million. But again, which means if there's a school out there that has a seat for one of our kids who has the level of need in their IEP, but we spent our tuition dollars, violation of the law. And so that's, it's, I don't want to call it a game, but it's dangerous. If the labor market shifts, and again, I don't think it will, so I think we'll save the budget from that.
If I'm right in assuming, superintendent, that even if there's not a program, students that's needing that outplace program, that we're still in violation of the law because then we're not have unmet need. It's no different than what you just described.
Yes, you're right. We are still absolutely responsible for our first, even if we don't have a person.
Yeah, we're taking the money away, and what I heard you say is that money's being extrapolated, and realizing that it's not a program.
Thank you. So I don't know if you're going to go into detail in this, but for the draft of education and reorganization of positions, I was hoping you could explain why it's such a jump in administration costs of special education. What do you mean that as part of the
Yes, absolutely. So as Robo just said, there's a pretty significant increase in special education administration. And one of the things that we struggled with last year, if you recall, is this constant turnover at the building level of people who are what they call our special ed supervisors. They facilitate our IEPs, they supervise teachers and ed techs. They're really that go-to person to run special education in the almost all of our buildings have some specialized programming. These are kids that otherwise be outplaced, and they're also responsible for those. So one of the things that the committee did last year, after presenting kind of a restructure, was approve that we make those special ed supervisor positions administrative benefits. And when we've seen it, in effect to that, you're seeing real consistency happen now. We're seeing IEPs lighting up right now. We're seeing families that are happier with their experience, kids getting the services. So this has been a significant plus to our work, more work to do, but that's that additional cost you're seeing. It's in and around those conditions. So you're going to see the film in that one particular way. They're not all new positions that are reclassified. So we did before, we made them with these, and it's had the effect of the whole.
First. Thank you. Also too, just to touch a little bit on that about the main care, the grants, the things that are what they're bringing in.
Yeah, so there's part of this work is having folks do main care billing. So we provide the services, explain this better than especially counselors. If you provide the services in IEP locally, you can bill for portions of that. That requires a little more documentation and doing things through forms and submitting on a constant basis. But that's up and running, and we're starting to see revenue come back to Lewiston for services that prior to this structure we were doing locally, but we were not doing it. And so we're looking at hundreds of thousands because we're taking care of people because we have a structure.
Could you reiterate for everyone the percentage of students receive special ed services?
Looking across the room. So we in the printout of your have the more colorful slide that I shared with you. It's the right spot, but it also has numbers of students in each student that have special education programming. And Director Crafts is actually here. She might be able to give me a number in whole 1,111 students in our district out of about 5,400. So about a fifth of our students, a little more actually, a fifth of our students have an IEP certified special instruction.
Thank you. I also want to point out that we have, I think it was 135 outplaced students is what we were told the other night. Outplaced students go to other facilities. The cost of those other facilities can be up to 40,000 to, I think he's at 150,000 a year. I just would like some, so we pay for that. Those students are going to other schools because we don't have the services in our schools to provide those students with special needs, the care and the services that they need. These are kids anywhere from fully disabled in a wheelchair that need additional help to autistic children, everything across the board. And we have 40 to 60 students right now on a waiting list to come in and go out or be outplaced into another school. And we're paying for that. That's a significant cost in our special education cost. I just want to make sure we're pointing that out. That piece to me was really important. Did I get that right, Krista? Yeah, actually I have a little update on this.
Yeah, Director Crass is coming.
So we were at 120. We were at 128 last week, and with not last week, but about a month ago. Over the weekend, I sort of had an aha moment. I had my secretary run the numbers. We're currently at 113. And the reason is because RETC is closing. So we've absorbed a lot of those kids back already because they're downstairs. And we have picked up on hiring recently for these, and so we have started to fill up our in-house programming. So it's starting to work like what I proposed last year, but we still have that need, and if we don't have the BHP, then it won't go. So that wait list is not changed. We've just brought some of that.
I don't want to pile on thoughts, but I just want to add administering all of those students is also on for the district, and so the class and we still look after their IEP, the transition plan, their weekly monitoring. We spent the end of last week, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, dealing with a situation of a violent act that started in Saco and landed on our doorstep here in Lewiston. And again, we are responsible for that. The outplaced schools work with us, but ultimately they're our kids, obviously. And so when a student makes a threat to a school on a ride home, that is a Lewiston Public Schools issue, not just a special purpose school in Saco issue. So I want you to be aware that we talk about volume of things, that work is also being done by some of these APs, transition plans, some of Ms. Craft's teams. And so just to know that special edu piece, there's an enormous cost to take care of our kids in that way, but the responsibility doesn't leave us. We don't just send them and say, okay, let us know when they need to come back. There's constant monitoring and work that goes with it on a daily basis.
Thank you. With the importance of the special education, the services that we provide, I'd just like to make everyone aware of the potential reductions, which include 9 RISE behavioral health professionals, 2 functional life skills behavioral health professionals. So even under the situation, we're trying to be bare bones. Thank you.
And so philosophically, what we try to do is say, okay, we have to maintain staff so that we can program for our kids if we can't outplace them. And all the outplacement costs are going up and they don't have the staff. So this is why you see a significant staffing reduction and why I hesitate when I propose the drop in tuition funding. If we don't have a mechanism as a plan B, which I think the committee wants to entertain at least as we move through the process, we're going to need a plan B. We need some kind of contingency or reserve set up that we can access to provide services to kids. This is lean, really, really lean, especially in special ed. Article 3.
Mayor,
Sorry. Good.
Just one quick question, Superintendent. So beyond the staffing that's required to support these students, if we were to bring them back here, they would be, physically here, would we have increased capital costs or equipment costs that we would need to do that beyond simply staffing?
Yeah, it's a good question. So there may be some. And students can require medical devices, they can require other accommodations that we would take care of. However, I would say the cost to send them elsewhere is so much more that we would be able to absorb that. The outplacement costs are really, really high. And the transportation also is extremely costly. I mean, we have some students that, and Director Kraft, correct me if I'm wrong, but there are students that are outplaced right now that are costing the district well over $100,000 annually between transportation and their level of need and the cost for their placement.
One student.
That's one student out of the 113, I think, as Crash just mentioned. Next article we have is Article 3. It's that career and technical education, Lewiston Regional Technical Center. They do great work. We love the programming. Our only complaint with their programming is there's not enough room for all the kids that want to do it. Director Callahan does a good job running that program. Again, you see teacher increases, benefits increases. The new positions for the satellite programs at Edward Little, again, tied to subsidy. Some of their costs are up mostly around supplies and equipment. And that's part of their Easter supplies. Again, sunsetting, so we're putting things back. Their equipment and supplies, if you think of the housing market right now, what's it cost to do anything in the housing market? If you want to build or if you want to buy currently, I know that that's either plateaued or maybe starting to trickle down, but it's incredibly expensive. The work they do every day, their materials are 2x4s, steel, automotive parts. So the cost of the work that they do is quite expensive. And again, they see the subsidy is up and that's directly connected to the new programs they're putting online. So there's a bit of a metric here, but most of what we're going to do over there will be paid for by this subsidy increase. Yeah.
To what effect is there community support of volunteer of professional labor or material that affects this?
Yeah, they have committees that work with each of their programs, and they actually get a lot of materials for free, a lot of on-site experience, what we call live work opportunities with area contractors and construction sites and things like that. We work with local medical facilities to provide that live work experience, and those are all things that save us dollars in the programming right now. One thing you might see, which is kind of an exciting piece, is if you kind of go diagonally across these lots here, there's a building being built on I-beams that will be sold after to pay for the funds or generate revenue to purchase materials to do another one. And so that's a good live work student experience and will also help someone in our community. Article 4 is other instruction. See a lot of repeated things here: contractual increases, insurance costs, return of extended offerings from ESER, increased costs, again, stipends, dues and fees and travel, all going up. And that's where you get into your co-curriculars. And so you could have, the entry fee for the mock trial team is up. The bus ride to go there is up. The cost of the rooms to stay for nationals is up. All of those kinds of things that some of our kids excel and thrive in, again, consistently cost us more money. Article 5 is student and staff support. You can see the increases that land elsewhere. There's been some movement of some positions for student services. And one of note, we have an outreach position now that's like a family liaison, and that's instead of the counselor position. So when you get into detail, you'll see one line reduced significantly, and then about 4 or 5 lines down, you see a bump. But it's the move of that position, because we can't code someone who's doing outreach and liaison work to a counselor position because it's not certified in that way. So that's some of the accounting practices that we have to be mindful of. Again, Easter items going back. We also have in here root ed positions. That's in line 163 of your detail. You'll see a bump there. What that is, it's a partnership with Tree Street. This allows us to provide not just services, but instruction and education opportunities for students who otherwise can't be in school, have been expelled, are waiting for certain levels of an IEP referral process to happen. But we are responsible for all of those students full-time, regardless. And so those positions are in there as an add. I think members of the committee can speak to their experience so far with students who have returned to us, who have been successful after having some significant behavioral concerns. I don't want to get too emotional about it, but like life-changing type conversations where a young man that you don't know how they became so violent at one point in time shows up and articulates how they've addressed certain parts of their life that drove their anger, and present themselves as a person, shake everyone's hand, ask for forgiveness, and return to school and do things well. If we can do that more and more, I think that's a win. So we've included that. Of all this budget, there are very few ads. That is one of them.
What's the count of students enrolled in the Root Ed program currently through LPS?
Yeah, so right now there's about 25.
Thank you.
And they have room for a little more. We actually started with 2 folks and we got up to 16 and we were pushing a threshold and we had to add more, I think, to continue to do a good job. But we started with 2. This was a pilot. It's gone well. We want to see if we can continue with it. Last item there, you can see in Article 5, you'll see some negatives. And that's debt service coming off the books from things that have been paid down or paid off. Yes.
For the rooted position, well, that for the rooted the school building, they're actually schooling our special ed kids that are many of our special ed kids that are waiting for outplacements. So they've helped us in that sense as well, because you asked about that earlier. So they're going there to receive their services and some instruction for their SDI.
All right, Article 5, staff and student support. Again, contract and insurance. Whoops, sorry. Article 6, is it Monday already? Article 6, system administration. Again, you see contract and insurance, and it just as food for thought when you go through those lines. That includes our human resource department, our business office, my office, the school committee, and the clerical staff. And school committee didn't even ask for a raise this year. I can say that they're not really paid to do their work, but neither are you, I don't think so. But that includes a number of offices, just so you have an idea of context of what that is.
Member Bolden?
Thank you. So just quickly, how many admins does our human resource department include? Just I was asked
Admin,
this question.
so in system administration, you would have that department. So you have a director and assistant director, and 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't want to use the wrong verbiage. Staff, they have 4 staff that help with the facilitation of human resources. And so that's, I don't know if I want to say administrative staff. Is that, I'm looking for benefit specialists.
Thank you. I was just asked that question earlier, so I wanted to make sure I had my information.
Absolutely.
Correct. Thanks.
It is an area, though, where we've had some high turnover at the leadership level. I think up until now, between vacancies and just not having enough capacity. As a school department, we employ, well, around 1,500 people. It's going to be less if this budget moves that way, but the movement of 1,500 people, their benefits, their FMLA, their hiring, their orientation, their records, all of that. So it's a pretty big lift. I feel fortunate that we have that staff currently. I don't know how we do it without it. Article 7, that's our school administration. You see contractual increases in insurance costs. There's one spot in the budget where we actually pulled out 2 positions. These are not reductions. That spot is considered whole, if you will. But at the high school, somehow we budgeted 2 additional or 2 people were kind of double entered. And so we itemized that when we went through and did our audit before we produced the binders and passed them out, or as those were being produced and passed out. So we found, again, 2 positions. That was an instant reduction in the overall budget. It's not loss of people, it was a misentry. So just want to make sure people aware. So if you see an exorbitant increase, that's actually has been pulled up. Article 8 is student transportation. Again, we contract our transportation services, and we have a contract that goes multiple years. That's in place. There's some increase there, and also some fuel cost items that impact us. In Article 9, it's our facilities maintenance area. Again, salary and benefits. There's a negotiation that's coming up around that group. And the costs that you see are connected to building-based projects. We noted insurance because it's not the cost of staff, like family insurance. It's the cost of our municipal insurance, if you will. So to insure our buildings and our grounds, that went up significantly this year. And we also have, of course, inflation cost utilities. So again, looking for ways to streamline things, but everything from, what did I say last week, from toilet paper to other things, it's whether it's pennies or dollars more, we're looking for ways to streamline that cost. Article 10 is debt service. Again, we've paid off some things. If you look at debt service and you have questions about what things or which projects, feel free to reach out. We can let you know. But that's down because we pay our bills. Article 11, this has been a long-standing thing, but this is an invoice for crossing guards. This is really a regs thing. We can't employ crossing guards because of a liability issue. And so we have a deal and we get invoiced for it. We believe that comes by way of the city because they're allowed to do certain things and we are not. And that pays for, I believe Bill said it was 4 crossing guards in our community, and they can't volunteer by statute. So the folks that do help us with crossing, our students are doing so for peanuts because they wish to. So they're very helpful and we appreciate them. Adult education is not an article. It lands separately in the world of school finance. There are some increases to teacher costs and benefits. Their local impact, though, is flat. And they're going to use some unexpended funds that are around from COVID to fund their additions. Pretty conservative budget, but again, no additional cost to us locally in this budget. And I wanted to open it up for discussion. Any input, any questions, any wonderings you have? Really, we'll answer what we can. And if we don't have the answer right here, we will certainly get it to you. I would also ask, because this is kind of a Jake talks a lot process. If you have thoughts on the process itself, we're certainly trying to learn and get better. I think we did from the last few years with good feedback from the committee. So if you have thoughts, please share them.
Mayor?
Oh, thank you. Superintendent, you mentioned that you kind of trimmed the budget back. I forget for what, for the outplacement for students, because you simply weren't going to be able to place them all, correct?
So we've trimmed the budget back in a lot of different ways, 65 positions and over $800,000 in other items. But yes, the trim on the tuition is not that we don't need it. It's that I'm trying to project, will those spots even be available for us to pay that bill? And if the spots aren't available, again, I say this with hesitation, we don't need to raise the money through the tax base to pay for it if we're not going to be able to place students there anyway. The other danger to all this, above and beyond what services can you provide, are there legal risks, is also the fact that special ed funding operates on a cycle. And whenever we spend down, we also don't get. And so every dollar we pull from special ed, there's a little light going off in my mind that it's going to be less subsidy next year and potentially the year after.
Right. Yeah. The thought process is that you will likely not incur those costs. So you're not budgeting for them at this time. Correct. Okay. And for the bus, you are budgeting for the complete amount for if all the buses ran for next year.
Yes, and I'm glad you asked that. I probably should have mentioned, when buses don't run, we don't pay for them. And so that's part of our contract. So if I call everyone in this room every morning and tell you that this morning it was bus 14 not running, which we've made some plans to try to cover, but I'll share that in the morning. But when bus 14 doesn't run, we don't get invoiced that day for bus 14. And so one of the temptations, kind of like the special ed tuition,
You
was to
see where I'm
say,
going with this,
yes,
right?
was to
Yeah.
say, if we don't run all the buses, we could potentially not budget the full contract amount. I just think for transportation wise, because I know there's some things in the pipeline around licenses, I think we're going to be better off next year. And it's gotten better throughout this year. So we're often canceling 1, sometimes 2 rides, less frequently 3. Whereas earlier in the year, it was 3, 4 on a daily basis. So I'm seeing that trend to the positive. I think we'll be able to offer that full complement. And so I feel that it would be responsible to budget the full amount.
Okay.
But
thank
along
you.
the same lines of thinking, we played with that a little bit.
Thank you.
Counselor Pease.
Thank you. Mine is just a basic couple questions. We talked about custodial. We have 9 buildings and it costs us a little over almost $4 million to take care of them. Corners is a new school and it costs us $420,000 custodial for a new school.
Yeah, so we work with some vendors to get projected costs. What the industry believes is appropriate for labor numbers. We also have a collective bargaining agreement, so that there's an impact there that impacts or has influence on how many staff can you have, what happens if you're understaffed, how much overtime can you do, and what the process of that. So there's some CBA things that protect it. As far as Bill or Adam, do you have additional breakdown in cost for Connor's custodial?
So one of the things about Connors, it does look like a bigger figure. And then we actually do have other items in there. So the other schools, we actually found a coding error in there, which makes Connors somewhat inflated because it has supplies and things like that should be in another line. So that particular line, when you're looking at custodial or operation, there's a discrepancy there that I just found last week. So good question.
Well, that's why I was asking the question because it looked enormous and saying.
We can, so for that one, Assistant Superintendent Parkett's going to grab a note. We can get you more detail on what that correction was, so you have some actuals in front of you.
And am I correct to understand that the cost per student per year is roughly $15,000?
I didn't do the straight math, but if you take the total and divide by our enrollment, that sounds about right. Where some of those students cost much less than that, and some of the students cost a lot more. And we get into things like the out of district placement, that student that is a 6-figure student to provide services, and then some who don't need any services of any kind that cost us a lot less. But to that end, from a subsidy perspective, it's around between 7 and 10 that we get per student. And so when you do the math on that higher level of need, it's an incredible cost.
Now, I wasn't questioning the fact that crushes. I was just surprised because, excuse me, there's a lot of public out there that have no idea how much it costs per child. And if they had that in their head, when they think, we got 5,300 students, multiply it. They'll surprise you. I did, and I knew it was high when I was on the school board, and it's probably doubled, if not more, since then. So that's why I was asking the question. Thank you.
No, thank you. It's an excellent point. The cost to educate our students is a real one for sure.
Member Bopelant.
Thank you. Piggybacking on Mayor Schlean's comment on transportation, are we part of a multi-year contract? Is that negotiated each year?
It's a multi-year contract. We do put those out to bid. I believe we are in year 2 of that multi-year contract that was negotiated after some bids and signed again a couple years ago. And I don't recall if it's a 4 or 5 year contract. I can find out, but we are earlier in a multi-year contract. We also have explored, are there ways to split that contract with other providers? What are the costs of that? What we have found is, and I want to avoid using names, I don't think that'd be appropriate, but we've gotten some quotes for things like an after-school run because we're short-staffed from a different vendor, and gotten quotes that are 3 and 4 times the amount of what Hudson does it for. And so that change in that area could be challenging, but we're always looking for ways to explore how do we make sure that our buses are running as efficiently as we can financially.
Counselor Jelinas?
Thank you. The amount of streamlining that's been done is remarkable, and I don't want to say, commend you on that. I mean, this is very difficult. These are very difficult decisions for sure. One of the things that I'm having a hard time getting my head wrapped around is in special education. I think about we're at the highest number of outplaced students that we've ever had, and the cost is tremendous. And yet, I look at the potential reductions, and they're all, in-house special educators, whether they're BHPs, whether they're ed techs, whether they're, whatever it is, right? And I feel like we're just setting ourselves up to do more outplacing of students as opposed to pulling our students in. And in keeping, with the spirit of special education law, we think about like the least restrictive environment. And I believe that Lewiston Public Schools has some of the most gifted teachers and special educators around. And I think strategically, we think about like these 6-digit figures that we're spending to outplace our students. When I believe, in fact, if we could figure this out differently and have them coming into the system, we could not only do it, but we could do it very, very well. And I think that would have monumental impact on this budget. I just, it's something I think about a lot, something I've talked about with you a lot. So I just throw that out for some consideration to the school committee.
Member Hurd?
Thank you. Just to go back to transportation for a second, is there anything that says if a student lives within a certain distance to school, they are not provided a ride, or they have to walk, or they have to get their own transportation? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, so there is language in policy that talks about a kind of a door-to-door distance. It's affected by middle and high school language. I want to say right now we're at 1.5 miles that we don't necessarily pick up. When you get to elementary, that language used to exist in and around the time when Connors was built. There was a strong support. There was strong support from our community to provide additional buses for students that some felt were within a walking distance, but with the path that goes behind the school, down behind Mayot's and Longley, that it just seemed like too far for students to travel. And so there was support there to have additional travel. That's remained since that decision was in place. There have been ideas shared. I know Member Bowden has shared a number of things that we've looked into as what would be the cost impact if we said 2 miles for middle and high school, or what would be the cost impact if we didn't run to the high school and just say, hey, look, at the high school level, you have to find your own way. And so we looked at that, and because middle and high school runs are paired, the cost savings to run just middle school down was not very significant. The expand to go out to 2 miles, there was potential savings, but not at the elementary level because we bus them anyway. That would require a policy shift. And just to remind people, it is Maine. It's dark if students are attending any programming after school or participating in activity. And so that transportation window, when it's dark at 3:45, 4 o'clock on snow and ice, despite the efforts to keep the walkways clear, it's still Maine. So we get into those conversations, and it's always a challenge. If the policy were to shift, I'm sure the bus lines would accommodate that shift, but.
Member Beaupont?
I'd like to make the council aware that the school committee is certainly concerned with the high cost of outplacing students, and we I don't want to use the word directed, but have requested Superintendent Langley to look at facilities, if we had the room for them. Perhaps Superintendent, you'd like to talk about your experience with other principals from some community collegial attempt.
Well, so space in our schools is always a concern. The one school that was built to have more space for these kinds of programs is Connors. We have since expanded programming there. We're trying to walk a line carefully to be fiscally responsible, realistic, provide services, and take a look at, and this is what Ms. Crafts has done a really good job at, taking a look at existing structures and figuring out how do we make sure that those programs are full. So instead of having 22 kids in a program that holds 50, what does it need to hold the 50 and fill it? And so what we found is really around staffing. We've preserved those pieces. We have moved a number of pieces, and we continue with that restructuring model. And we're bringing someone in hopefully soon with to support day treatment programming. Again, another big cost driver. So kind of threading this needle of we have room for more kids now with our projected costs for staff and space. But the pendulum will reach a spot where the programs are full. So we've in effect hired what we can, what's available. We have not spent as much outside, and then figuring out, do we have space to add more? Are we at capacity? Is it a little more staff? Is it a little more outplacement dollars? And so right now we're really in that pivot point. We have room in our programs to grow. We have to properly staff it, which has been a challenge, as you know, Councilor Giles, from the work that you do. Staffing is incredibly challenging, but we're moving in the right direction. So this year I didn't feel confident in just going all the way that way because of staffing. And I didn't feel confident going all the way outplaced because of no spots. So we've squeezed it, we've shrunk it. I would actually anticipate a year from now, if things go the way we hope, we're going to need additional funding because we're going to need additional staff because the students are here. But that additional funding, hopefully, in a perfect world, and I'm not making promises, but in a perfect world, less kids are outplaced. So that big tuition doesn't go out. And so it can stay here. And that ultimately, over a multi-year cycle of us maintaining these efforts and staying committed to it, should save Lewiston taxpayers a lot of money. It should allow us to build for additional revenue. And it should allow our kids, I think most important, to stay home where really they belong if we could provide the service.
Counselor Scott.
Thank you.
Can I follow up on that
Oh.
just a second? I'm sorry. Thank you. Can you share with the council your discussion with the area superintendents about forming some sort of, I'm not sure the word league or.
Yeah, so there's been discussion with other superintendents about trying to form a regional something, another school, another what can we do kind of component so that while you're still outplacing, you're not outplacing in Saco and north of Augusta and all the way to Brunswick and west, that you could outplace maybe just down the road. The challenge we face is with staffing and facilities. And so RETC, which was a regional structure for some students that need to be outplaced, is actually being closed this year by way of Auburn School Department. And so the regional approach from a fiscal standpoint actually failed before our eyes this school year. So conversations around how do we grow and become more dynamic as a district, to me, I'm kind of going 10,000 feet now. You get to a place where your special programs are staffed and for the most part full, and you're not spending the tuition dollars. That's when I would come back with the conversation of, do we start to explore a space? And to me, we're going to have to finesse that a little bit because we need the space before we'll be on capacity. But I think that we're not too far away from that right now. If we continue on this trend and we continue to add staff, our programs will be full. A year from now, or maybe even sooner, we could be talking about, we need a building to keep our kids in our community because we have the staff, we have the programming, but we fail the infrastructure. And so I think that conversation is coming. If the labor market continues to improve, we'll have the staff to do that. Sorry for the long answer. I wanted you to hear something more big picture of us thinking ahead. What does it look like to keep more and more kids in district to save that big cost outside?
And that was what I was going to ask. So no, you're fine. So
this is a hugely important piece for our community to understand. Because as Councilor Jelinas had stated, this is really something that we need to wrap our heads around and really embrace to make sure that we are able to offer these services to the students that are living here. Lewiston, they say Lewiston is a service center. Well, Lewiston is a service center because it has places like Margaret Murphy and Sandcastle, and they're helping these students. People are moving to the community because these services are available for special needs students. And the rise of special needs students in our country, let alone our community and our state, is growing exponentially by the year. So it's something that we really have to look at, and it's going to be a tough conversation to get the community to understand. But when we can pull all of these things in-house, we really will be saving a significant cost to our taxpayers. But it's getting through that bump of getting it all in-house once we have staff and people available to fill those positions. And that's a conversation that's going to be very difficult, I think, but it's a conversation that we need to have. I think that we need to embrace this. We could actually become a very unique school community in our state to handle that, and it would actually be beneficial to our community in the long run.
Member Bowden?
Thank you. I guess I wanted to bring something up, but I first was just curious, how many positions do we have in our district that are specifically social emotional learning, like a teacher, social emotional learning, is that a title, an SEL teacher in our district?
So SEL specific staff. So right now we're using ESER for SEL related staff. General fund wise,
There are no teaching.
Yeah. There's no SEL teaching positions in this budget, in this general fund.
So that was kind of my question. So that the ESER funds for that is sunsetting and we're not putting them into our budget.
Sunsetting a year from now. So
A year from
we
now.
have the ability to maintain those roles and the positive impacts they're having that principals were telling us about last week. They were saying essentially, I couldn't do without this. We really need to have that position be folded into our budget. So no, not this year. We're trying to figure that out in multiple ways. We're pursuing grants. There's some money out there. So we're trying to find a way to continue the work. But I guess it would be important to know, and they may show up at a different time, but they just reiterated this. All of the building administrators said, we have to have that. The impact it's having. And I know I kind of got energized a bit a few meetings ago when we talked about SEL, because I've never seen our kids hurting more than they are right now. Never seen it. I shared a picture at a prior school committee meeting of a dozen forms that are their packets that people fill out when they have a kid that is threatening to harm themselves, to end their lives. DHHS calls for kids that have bruises, bumps, stories that they're talking about, from shaken babies to violence that they're witnessing and or experiencing. So I think it was last week, it was last Monday, I took the picture because I wanted to show the school committee at a dozen of them, Monday morning. That's how I started my week, reading through and verifying that staff contacted the appropriate people at DHHS and that they contacted parents and they documented that parents had been contacted and what was the handoff of care for that individual child. Monday morning, 12 of them. So if we think we don't need SEL positions right now, I'm not saying you're saying that. I think that sometimes people are tying SEL to different conversations and streams of thinking. And I'm not knocking that. I'm just saying we're seeing it in our classrooms. Our kids are not in a good space. It's kids' lives that we're talking about with this work. And if we want kids to be able to cope and be successful in school and then in the workplace, they have to grow these skills and these strategies, and they have to develop them. And what we're seeing right now, whether it's COVID effect, screens, computers, phones, I don't know what to blame. Maybe it's everything, but from a society perspective, from a society perspective, we have to prep our kids to have more skills, and we have to explicitly teach that because they're not getting it elsewhere. Many of our students.
So the reason I asked that is, we all got an email today from a student at LHS who's very concerned about just their well-being at the high school, afraid to go to school, They feel like, we've gotten soft and administration's gotten soft and kids are just getting away with everything. And so that's concerning. It was concerning to hear that and to hear a different perspective from a student. And, also teacher concerns that have reached out with, behaviors and like, oh my gosh, don't take away more staff. We need more one-on-one. It's just out of control. And so I don't know if that's an SEL thing. I don't know. I think more it starts at home. I think it's a parenting thing, but I don't know how we fix a parenting thing as a school committee. I also wanted to bring up, unless you wanted to talk about it, Tanya. Okay, so Tanya also emailed the school committee with regard to Ice Week and Mud Week and summer school. And I know that summer school is sunsetting. Is that correct?
So we've been supporting summer school programming with Easter funds that is sunsetting, and you'll see things in the budget back in connected to summer school. Yes.
And so I guess my question is, as far as Mud Week and Ice Week, where Tanya brought this up, is there additional costs that go with Ice Week and Mud Week with the teachers who show up or the ed techs that show up with food? Like, are there additional costs to those 2 weeks?
Yes, we staff it. We provide some transportation at different levels. So yes, there's absolutely a cost to that.
Is there any way to look into possibly finding a solution to those costs, is like, as far as, holding students accountable, having them, if there's something they need to make up on their own at home during that week and submit it by a certain date, instead of having them come into school for makeup stuff?
I think a lot of things are possible. I know that some of the feedback that was received after doing midterms this year, I think people want a little more notice, a little more time, and to be, more cerebral about this is really happening. But the feedback, large in part, was pretty good. And they're also using time during the midterms and finals, the rest of the day that kids are not there for grading and what have you. But there's also built-in time for students to remediate, get a little extra help, what have you. There's time during the school day. There's time after the school day where teachers are still available to help some students. I personally have always struggled with the Ice and Mud Week piece because it's concurrent. It's while, so if I'm taking class and Karen is my teacher, the class I'm taking right now, that's what I'm getting help on during the February break and the April break. That's Ice and Mud Week respectively. But that's while you're in the class. And I've always struggled with that because I feel like you have access to your teacher whenever you have class, and you should be able to make arrangements and do some of this stuff. And with midterms and finals back and that opportunity to meet with the teachers, I could see that transitioning personally. I've not talked to the high school staff and principal about that just yet. It was a good point brought up over the weekend. The summer school piece, though, I still see value in that, and that's credit recovery. So that students completing a course to get credit toward graduation. So it's less about remedial, more about you got to get it done. But I still see that cycle of, well, I'll do it later on occasion, and that's frustrating to both teachers and others.
I just think if we're really pinching at pennies here and trying to find ways to reduce costs, if Ice and Mud Week, end up on the chopping block and that saves us a couple positions in special education, I don't think there's anything wrong with holding our kids more accountable. And they have ample opportunity to make things up really anytime that they want. We want them to graduate. We want them to be successful. I just think the costs that incur with that, like I really am glad Tanya brought that up, and I agree with her wholeheartedly on this. Maybe that's something that we look into cutting and see what sort of savings we end up with. So if you guys could look into it, I would appreciate that.
Yeah, we can definitely look into it more closely. I do want to just throw out there's a caveat is some of those things have been Easter funded and may have continued. So while it might be a shift in direction, I don't know that it will save us money in this document, but we'll find out how much it will potentially save us.
Member Beaupont and then Member Whitlow.
Thank you. Correct me if I'm wrong, but if I remember, we all in the committee here attended a graduation in the summer of about 12 students that without the nurturing and support through Ice Week and Mud Week and summer school probably would have dropped out. So I think there is a payoff to it. But I'd hate to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah, there's, yes, you're absolutely right. And there's also a delicate balance that student that doesn't drop out as a sophomore, as a junior, continues to be enrolled and counts towards your subsidy. So there's money coming in for those students who still are working through those processes, and some of that enrollment may otherwise be paying for things like Ice Week, Mud Week, and summer school in our subsidy formula. Not directly, but as an enrollment number that we have to consider.
Thank you. So I don't know if you all know what Ice Week and Mud Week is. So Ice Week is February break where students come in and get extra help. And so that's staffed by pretty much ed tech. So there's some teachers. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's a blend. It's more of who's available. And in Ice and Mud, they're facilitating work that teachers have provided, current teachers. Whereas summer school is, we know what standards you need. That's what we're working on.
And so Mud Week is April vacation. So just so you understand what we're talking about. One of my big concerns, and I've mentioned it many times, is that our children, our students, don't know how to study for a test. I mean, some do, obviously, right? But they don't know how to submit their homework on time. They don't know how to meet a deadline. And we've allowed them to make up all of this work, their homework, tests. If they fail a test, they get to retake it. And so we're not preparing our students for the real world of being able to be successful. And so and this is through policy, so that would have to be changed, but that wouldn't have to be right away. But so when we do this, our students are saying, oh, well, I'll just go to summer school and make it up. Oh, I will just go to Ice Week and Mud Week to get my standards met. And so, yes, it helps students, but if it's not there, then they have to do it when it's due. They have to pass a test. And so I see this with my own children. And so this is one, and they're smart kids. And so why can't they pass a test? We had to when we went to school. Why can't they submit their homework when it's due? It's all on the computer. They know it's there. So there's no excuses in my book of why our kids can't do it. And if they're in special education, they have an IEP. They have those resources for extra help that are provided to them. So in my opinion, unless they have an IEP or 504 or whatever it is for extra resources, they should be getting their work done when it's due. And so I think we are failing our students with this policy, allowing them to continuously redo and redo and redo. And so that's why I would like to be a very big advocate for saying, let's get rid of Ice Week, Mud Week, and summer school. Maybe not summer school, okay, but still, in my opinion is summer school shouldn't be there either. But I would love to get rid of Ice Week and Mud Week and change our policy so that kids have to get their work done when it's due.
Very briefly, I would like to add, I think that following up on everything that was just said, I think Ice Week, Mud Week, summer school picks up the gap. Some of it is just kids not wanting to put in the effort. But I think it picks up the gap of the kids who don't quite qualify for an IEP, but also don't function fully in the environment that our traditional schools provide. And I think that it helps kids who fall in that area. And I think that ties into the social emotional learning piece also, with the mindset that increase in poor behaviors means that we should move away from SEL. My perspective is coming out of the pandemic where kids have had limited social interaction and limited exposure. I think that's why we're seeing the increased behaviors. And I think that evidence supports that we need more SEL in our schools to help overcome this for a period of time so that kids can get back to some level of normalcy. So that's just my piece on it. Misheard.
Thank you. What grades do we offer summer school for? kids at all grade levels have opportunities for summer school. And summer school is sort of an umbrella term that we use for a lot of summer programming. So at the elementary level, summer school is really enrichment. Summer school is not about making up classes. It's not about getting additional credits or anything like that. It's really about enrichment. At the middle school and at the high school, we run our 21st century programming, which is really about enrichment. But there are also opportunities for students to make up standards or credits as well. So pre-K through 12 has opportunities in the summer.
And for elementary student enrichment, can you explain a little bit more of like what that means?
Absolutely. So there are some academic components, but it's really to enhance or to give them more of what they would have received during the school year. So more support in literacy, more support in math, but they're also digging into things that in going on field trips and having experiences that they might not have if they were not in an enrichment program or may not be able to experience during the school year.
And how do students, I don't want to say like qualify, but how does a student get enrolled or qualify for quote unquote summer school?
So all of our 21st century programs, it's really about family interest and signing their students up. There are some schools that have additional programming to 21st century that's more academic focused, and students may be invited based on an area of need, or it might be a continuation of some support that they received during the school year. Then there are special ed students who it's part of their IEP that they get extended year services. And so they have specific goals that they continue to work on with specific programming.
And what are like the hours that like, is there like a 9 to 3 or a 8 to, like, what are the?
Sure. So usually it's a half a day time. It's 8 to 12, 8 to 1, something like that. Students have an opportunity to, eat breakfast and lunch at school, have those experiences. There are some days where the program might run a little longer for kids if they're on a field trip or something like that. But it usually starts the beginning of July and ends the last week in July or beginning of August, depending on the weeks and how it falls. And then it's usually a partial day. It's not a full day.
Okay. So kind of why I'm trying to get more information from you is, so just let's say, for instance, like our pre-K programming that we have now, they don't get a unified arts. They don't get to go on field trips. They don't get any of that stuff during our regularly scheduled school calendar. Correct. So, they're getting something else or addition in their enrichment or their summer program. So, to kind of go what Tanya and Janet are talking about, we're offering other things like outside of what we would normally offer our kids that go to regular calendar school. So we're not really being equitable to our students who are in the regular school calendar and summer school. So would we have the ability, if let's just say all of our pre-K students wanted to enroll in summer school, would we have the ability to do that? Would we have the staff and the teachers to be able to staff something like that if all of our pre-K students or if all of our first grade students, or do you kind of get where I'm going? So if everybody wanted to join summer school to be able to enjoy those extra benefits, would we be able to staff something like that?
No. We don't have, because it's just like Ice Week and Mud Week. It's who's willing to work. It's outside of the teacher's contract. They do get, obviously they get paid and there's some, they get compensated for the time that they work and some planning time and things like that. But we absolutely would not have the staff to provide any sort of summer program to all of our students unless we made some really drastic changes to our school year and our contract and all of that.
So I think kind of like just what I'm saying is not that I'm going to enroll either of my children in like summer school or stuff, because I'm home with them. So we do that stuff at home and I'm able to do that, which I'm fortunate enough to do that. And I know some other families don't. That's why they enroll their students in summer school or that like enrichment program. But I'm just thinking as a district wide, like we want to be able to provide all the things for each student. So if we were to potentially take some of those programs away in the summer, would we be able to offer those other things during a normal school year or some sort of thing?
So most of our summer programming that happens at the elementary level is funded through the 21st Century Grant. There's very little that the district, there's a percentage that the district has to contribute. Even our transportation costs over the last 5 or so years has been funded by another grant that we apply for to cover the transportation, because there just has not been local funds to do that. So at the elementary level, the 21st Century Grant funds covers those experiences, and there's requirements in that, within that grant, as to what it is that we offer, how many students we can provide those experiences to, how much staff we can pay, because it's not a bottomless pot of money. So we're limited in terms of what that grant allows. If we were to say we were not going to do that anymore, that wouldn't save the district. It would save a small percentage of funds, but not the whole thing, because it's being paid for with grant funds. Now, that's the elementary side of things. The middle and high school do have those 21st century programs, but I think what has been talked about tonight is really about the credit recovery and is about the academic piece, which is not part of the 21st century. That is funds that are either funded by the ESSER grant or Title I funds at the middle school level, or the local budget.
Thank you. That's what I was looking for, of who covers what and how that gets covered.
Counselor Harriman.
Just real quickly, just one more piece to that, because I know you asked, could we do that stuff during the day? So the constraints around the 21st century funding, the answer is no. It's not an allowable place and time.
Thanks. Just going back to the SEL topic, I just wanted to reiterate the importance of it and thank you for putting it in the list of priorities. We see how many adults don't have the social and emotional and interpersonal skills to, communicate and deal with other people respectfully and effectively. And if those are the parents and grandparents that kids are taking their cues from, then they're just setting themselves up for the same issues. So the school is where they're going to learn those skills. And I thank you again for prioritizing it.
Member Beauplan.
Thank you. I'd just like to go on record as respectfully disagreeing with Member Bowden and Member Whitlaw. They make good points, but I don't want to turn this into a debate. The council's time is very precious, and we can save my point for another time. Thank you.
Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you. So I understand the need to, I guess, have some accountability for students, but I'm afraid that if we, start eliminating summer school, mud week, ice week, especially in student body, which is we have so many economically disadvantaged students, I just don't think that's going to turn out well for us. By us, I mean as a community, as a city. And I also wanted to echo what Councilor Harriman had to say about SEL. It is very much needed. I participated in SEL Day for the school, and I declared that Friday SEL Day, and it's I learned a lot during that day, and we need more of it. Thank you.
Counselor Pease.
Thank you. I just want to tell you, I've been going through this budget. I know the task you have at hand. I appreciate all the work that the school board has been doing, what you've done, how you've organized it so it makes it a little more understandable. Somebody like myself. Just want to thank you for all your work.
Any further comments, questions? Member McCarthy, Counselor McCarthy.
Thank you. One of the complaints that I've had from a lot of parents is that the recording of the school committee meetings are almost impossible to understand what's going on, who's saying what's going, and it's really frustrating for them. And I didn't know if at some point you guys were going to upgrade a little bit so that parents can actually understand what you guys, all the hard work that you guys do on the school committee.
It's a great question. Came up recently from committee members also. There's a few things going on and we have a couple of tech people here that might be able to correct me a bit. One thing is we're using YouTube to stream things out to the public, and that's where we save our recordings so people can watch them later. When you send things, regardless of our equipment, which I think could be improved, but the equipment that we do have, YouTube downgrades that to publish it. It's just what YouTube does to the content. So there's a piece of that. The other piece is our spaces are not great. So you can see the big long setup. We have the mics and they're paired back. We did upgrade to another camera that they're working on trying to get better visual with. We looked at some pricing, say about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, to outfit like our multi-purpose room at the high school for audio visual equipment. And the quote came in at over $200,000. And knowing that we're moving, I mean, I think we learned some things in COVID and people want to have access. And I like that for people online to watch it streamed or to watch the video later. I do think that's important. It is still a public session. People can come in person. I don't know where we're pointed if we want to spend, $200,000 or whatever the cost is to have upgraded equipment and tools for our tech folks to work with to put out the video, or use those funds for something else. At one point in time, there was even conversation, at least around the state, with as it relates to school committee meetings among superintendents and communities, about whether or not we should stop streaming altogether because the quality was not great. You can't really participate. It's hard to hear. So providing it is almost more cumbersome than not, when the recordings can be uploaded differently than a live stream. So I don't know if anyone from our tech team wants to add to that in a more articulate way than I can share.
Jake, you said it beautifully. Mark Rock, Director of IT here. We're using equipment that's portable so that we're flexible to have school committee meetings in multiple spaces, and know that through our ESSER funding, we are looking at upgrading our AV equipment in spaces.
Because I know I found it extremely helpful. I watched several planning board meetings. I've gone back and looked at our council meetings to make sure that what I thought I heard. And I know there's been a few topics that have come up, school committee level, and I've gone on to try to watch it, and it was just a effort and futility trying to understand what was going on. So I think, in my opinion, that keep publishing those on YouTube and allowing the parents to be able to view them when they have time to view it is a big asset. I know the council meeting, I am unbelievably surprised at the number of people in the community that actually tune in and watch the council meeting. It just blew my mind when I talk to people, oh, I watch you all the time. I watch you all the time. It's like, really? So I think it's important for you guys to continue upgrading so that the general public can have a better understanding of what's going on. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, for sure. I'm one of those people that watches you. But watching the meeting, not just.
Mayor. Oh. Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to kind of ask Counselor McCarthy, when you say upgrading or fixing our streams, short of like zooming in on us when we're talking, is that what you're looking for? I guess I'm kind of confused on what's hard to follow with our meetings. So just you can't tell where we are in the agenda. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, they're extremely hard to follow on what's going on, and the voice isn't the best, the picture, forget it. So it's really hard to follow, and you're trying to figure out who's saying what, and you're focusing more on trying to figure out what's going on than what is actually being said. And so you just miss the whole conversation.
Thank you.
Mayor.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I would argue that money spent on transparency and public access is money well spent. And I think that will pay off dividends in the future.
If there's no further questions or comments, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I'll second that.
Okay. All in favor?